My wife mocked my salary after I paid her tuition for years, so I ended our marriage and now she's facing the reality she thought she'd avoid forever. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and when I met my wife, she made it clear from the beginning that she was meant for more. She talked about her childhood like it was a series of missed chances, about how smart she was but how life had gotten in the way, and how education was the one thing standing between her and the future she deserved. Whenever money came up, her voice would tighten just a little, like it embarrassed her to need help. She used words like temporary and just for now, always reminding me that this phase wouldn't last forever. She framed her tuition as an investment in us. I still remember her sitting across from me at the kitchen table, laptop open, numbers pulled up on the screen, saying, "Once I graduate, everything changes. We'll finally be equals." She promised me it wouldn't always be this way, that one day I'd be the one resting while she carried the weight. I believed her, not because it made sense on paper, but because I loved her and wanted to be the kind of partner who showed up when it mattered. So I took on extra shifts. I said no to promotions that required time or risk. I let my own goals sit quietly in the background while I covered rent, groceries, utilities, insurance, everything. I'd come home late, exhausted, and find her studying on the couch, and instead of resentment, I felt pride. I told myself this was what commitment looked like. She never missed a chance to praise me. "I couldn't do this without you," she'd say, squeezing my hand. She called me her backbone, her safety net, her proof that real partners exist. Every time she said, "I'll never forget this," it made the sacrifices feel lighter, almost noble. I truly believed that love wasn't about keeping score. I thought supporting her future meant securing ours together. At the time, it never occurred to me to ask what would happen once she no longer needed me in the same way, and that assumption would quietly shape everything that came next. Somewhere along the way, paying her tuition stopped being the exception and started becoming my entire role. At first, it was just the big things, semester fees, textbooks, exam costs, but then there were always extras. Certifications she needed to stay competitive. Conferences she couldn't miss. Software subscriptions, upgraded laptops, networking dinners that were supposedly essential for her future. Every time I hesitated, she'd say, "This is for us, remember," and I'd feel guilty for even questioning it. My life, meanwhile, started shrinking in ways I didn't notice until much later. I stopped buying clothes unless something ripped. I turned down trips with friends because money was tight right now. I stopped thinking about changing careers or taking risks because stability mattered more. While her world expanded with new opportunities, new confidence, and new circles, mine narrowed down to work, home, and responsibility. I became very good at surviving and very bad at dreaming. She started introducing herself differently to people. Not as a student struggling to get by, but as someone who was almost there, someone with potential and momentum. And when people asked about me, she'd smile and say, "Oh, he's the one holding everything down." Everyone would nod approvingly, like I was doing something admirable. No one asked how that felt. What hurt the most was how natural it all seemed to her. Covering everything became expected, not appreciated. If I looked tired, she'd remind me it was temporary. If I mentioned stress, she'd say, "Just a little longer." I started noticing how my needs never quite fit into the conversation anymore, like they were inconveniences we'd deal with later. At night, I'd lie in bed listening to her type away at her laptop, the soft click of keys filling the room, and I'd tell myself this was what partnership looked like. Sacrifice now, balance later. I wore responsibility like a badge of honor because it was the only thing that made sense of how lopsided everything felt. I didn't realize it then, but somewhere in all of this, I stopped being a husband with dreams and started being a resource. And once that line blurred, it became easier for her, and harder for me, to remember I was more than just the person paying the bills. The first paycheck she brought home felt like a milestone we were supposed to celebrate together. She came through the door smiling in a way I hadn't seen before, lighter, almost relieved, and waved her phone at me like proof that everything we'd struggled through was finally worth it. I hugged her, told her how proud I was, and meant every word. At that moment, I truly believed this was the beginning of the balance she'd promised. But her tone started changing in small, almost invisible ways. It wasn't cruel at first, just comparisons slipped into casual conversation. She'd ask how much overtime paid compared to her hourly rate, or joke about how different industries value people differently. When she talked about work, there was a new sharpness in her voice, a confidence that sometimes tipped into something colder. I told myself it was just excitement, that she was finding her footing in a new world. Then the comments started. Little things. You've been at that job a long time. Have you ever thought about aiming higher? Once, while scrolling through listings on her phone, she laughed and said, "Wow. I can't believe how low some of these salaries are." She didn't look at me when she said it, but the silence afterward felt heavy. I remember standing in the kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee in the air, wondering why my chest felt tight. She began talking about ambition like it was a personality trait I was missing. She framed it as concern, always careful with her words, but the message was clear. My stability, the very thing she once praised, now sounded like stagnation in her mouth. When I tried to joke it off, she'd smile and say, "I just want us to grow." I didn't argue. I nodded, listened, and adjusted, the way I always had. I told myself this was just another phase, another adjustment period. But late at night, lying next to her while she slept peacefully, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Respect, once given freely, now felt conditional, and I couldn't tell what I'd done to start losing it. The first time she mocked my salary in front of other people, I told myself I was imagining it. We were at a small get-together with some of her coworkers, crowded around a dining table cluttered with empty glasses and half-eaten plates. Someone asked what I did for work, and before I could finish answering, she laughed and said, "Let's just say he's in it for the passion, not the paycheck." The room went quiet for half a second, just long enough for me to feel it land. She smiled like it was harmless, like it was just playful honesty. One of her coworkers awkwardly chuckled and said something about money not being everything, and she nodded along, adding, "Exactly." I keep telling him it's okay, for now. The words "for now" stuck to me like gum on a shoe. I could feel my face getting warm, but I forced a smile because calling it out would have made me look sensitive. On the drive home, I finally asked, carefully, "Hey, that comment earlier, did you mean it like that?" She sighed like I'd inconvenienced her and said, "Oh my God, relax. I was joking. You know I'm just being honest." She followed it up with, "You should want more for yourself," as if embarrassment was supposed to motivate me. After that, the jokes didn't stop, they escalated. She'd comment on prices at restaurants and say things like, "Well, I can afford this now," then laugh and nudge me. If I stayed quiet, she took it as permission. If I looked uncomfortable, she'd accuse me of being insecure. Either way, the message was the same, my contribution no longer impressed her. What hurt most wasn't the money itself. It was the way she spoke about it, like my years of carrying us were suddenly irrelevant. The same income that paid her tuition, kept a roof over our heads, and bought her time to succeed was now a punchline. I started choosing my words carefully in public, shrinking myself to avoid becoming the joke again. I didn't realize it then, but every time I stayed silent, I was teaching her something dangerous, that my dignity was negotiable, and that she could cross lines without consequence. And once that door opened, she didn't hesitate to walk straight through it. I started noticing the shift in how she talked about our past when other people were around. It wasn't dramatic or obvious at first, just small edits, subtle omissions that made my stomach tighten. She'd talk about her degree like it was something she powered through alone, using phrases like, "I worked so hard to get here," or "I sacrificed everything for this." When people asked how she managed financially, she'd vaguely say, "Oh, we figured it out," and quickly change the subject. One night, we ran into an old friend of hers from before we were married. He congratulated her and said, "Man, you really pulled yourself up, huh?" She smiled proudly and replied, "Yeah, I didn't really have a choice. I had to make it work." I stood there holding my drink, feeling invisible, like I'd been edited out of my own life. No one looked at me. No one questioned it. On the drive home, I tried to bring it up. I said, "It kind of sounded like you did everything on your own." She rolled her eyes and replied, "Why are you making this about you? You know what you did." That sentence stuck with me, "You know what you did," as if my role didn't need acknowledgement because it was assumed, expected, and therefore unworthy of mention. After that, it got worse. She'd tell people I was supportive, but in the same tone someone might use to describe a comfortable couch. Useful. Reliable. Replaceable. My sacrifices were reduced to background noise while her achievements took center stage. It felt like she was slowly rewriting our history into a story where she was the hero and I was just part of the setting. At home, she talked about her success like it was proof she'd outgrown something. Sometimes, I wondered if that something was me. I started questioning whether she ever planned to share the success she promised, or if the plan was always to climb and then look down. Lying in bed at night, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, I replayed conversations in my head, searching for the moment things changed. What scared me wasn't just that she was taking credit, it was how easily she erased me. And deep down, I started to feel like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't yet see, but instinctively knew was about to give way. The truth didn't come out during a fight or some dramatic confrontation. It came out quietly, almost accidentally, which somehow made it worse. One evening, she asked me to grab her phone from the bedroom because she'd left it charging there. When I picked it up, the screen lit up with a notification banner from a group chat I didn't recognize. I wasn't snooping, I hadn't even unlocked the phone, but one line was enough to stop me cold. It said, "At least once I'm fully established, I won't have to settle anymore." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood there in the dim hallway, the glow of the screen reflecting off the wall, frozen between pretending I hadn't seen it and needing to understand what I just read. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the phone. What I saw next rewired something in my brain permanently. The messages weren't angry or emotional. They were casual. Calculated. She joked with her friends about how safe I was, how I made life easy while she was getting herself to the next level. One message said, "He's not ambitious, but he's dependable." That's what I needed at the time. Another followed, "I couldn't have done school without him, but I'm not staying stuck." I felt nauseous. Years of late nights, extra shifts, skipped opportunities, all reduced to a phase she'd used strategically. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, reading words that made it painfully clear I was never her destination. I was her bridge. When I brought the phone back to her, she smiled and thanked me like nothing had happened. She asked what I wanted for dinner. I answered on autopilot, my mind replaying those messages over and over. Everything I thought we were suddenly felt fake, like I'd been living inside a story she was already planning to leave behind. That night, lying next to her while she slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me shift. Love didn't disappear in that moment, but trust did. And once that was gone, I knew, deep down, that there was no version of this marriage that would ever feel safe again. After what I saw, I couldn't unsee it. Every smile felt rehearsed, every compliment sounded hollow, but I still tried to believe there was something left worth saving. I told myself that people say stupid things to friends, that maybe I'd misunderstood the tone, that marriage meant giving someone the chance to explain. So a few days later, I asked her if we could talk, really talk, without jokes or deflection. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where she once promised we'd be equals. I told her I felt disrespected, that her comments about my salary and ambition hurt more than she seemed to realize. I didn't mention the messages yet, I wanted honesty, not damage control. She crossed her arms and sighed, already irritated. "I just feel like you're threatened by my success," she said, like she'd practiced the line. I tried again, slower this time. I reminded her of the years I supported her, the sacrifices we made together, how much I believed in her. She shook her head and said, "You always bring that up like I owe you something." That sentence hit harder than any insult. I wasn't asking to be repaid, I was asking to be respected. The conversation went nowhere. Every feeling I expressed was labeled insecurity. Every concern was reframed as me trying to hold her back. At one point she said, "I can't shrink myself just because you're uncomfortable," and I realized she'd already decided who the villain was. It wasn't her behavior, it was my reaction to it. I left the table feeling smaller than when I sat down. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me, wondering how two people could live the same years and come away with such different stories. I was fighting for a marriage she was already emotionally done with, and the loneliness of that realization was suffocating. For the first time, I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years: what if loving her meant slowly disappearing? And once that thought took root, it refused to let me rest. The moment I hit rock bottom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, sharp, and final. We were arguing late one night, the kind of argument that starts over something small, dishes, tone, exhaustion, but is really about everything you've been swallowing for years. The apartment felt tight, airless, the overhead light too bright, like it was exposing things neither of us wanted to admit. She was pacing while I sat on the edge of the couch, trying to explain why I felt so dismissed lately. I said, "I just want to feel like I matter to you," and my voice cracked in a way that embarrassed me instantly. She stopped walking and looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse. Indifference mixed with impatience. Then she said it. "I mean, if I'm being honest, I kind of married down." The words landed and just sat there between us. No apology followed. No backtracking. She kept talking, explaining how she'd outgrown this phase of her life, how she wanted more now, how she deserved more. She said, "I didn't think I'd be here forever," like she was talking about a bad neighborhood, not a marriage. I felt my chest cave in, like all the air had been knocked out of me at once. I couldn't even respond. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I thought about every shift I worked late, every bill I paid without complaint, every time I told myself love meant patience. And there she was, standing in front of me, saying it all out loud without shame. Something broke in me then. Not loudly, quietly. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped asking to be understood. I realized I could spend the rest of my life proving my worth to someone who'd already decided I wasn't enough. She eventually went to bed, slamming the door behind her. I stayed on the couch in the dark, staring at nothing, feeling emptier than I ever had. That was the lowest point, not the insult itself, but the clarity that followed. I finally understood that staying meant accepting this version of myself forever. And sitting there alone, I made a decision I didn't tell her about yet, but one that would change everything. After that night, something inside me went silent. I stopped trying to argue, stopped reacting to her comments, stopped looking for validation that was never coming. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd finally accepted things, like I'd learned my place and settled into it. She seemed relieved by my calm, mistaking my withdrawal for agreement. But I wasn't giving up, I was preparing. I started paying attention in a different way, quietly and carefully. I separated our finances, opening an account she didn't know about and routing my paycheck there. I gathered records, tuition payments, rent receipts, bank statements, years of proof tucked away in folders on my laptop. Every click of the mouse felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. At home, I kept my routine steady. I still cooked dinner. I still asked about her day. I nodded while she talked about work, about her future, about how things were finally moving in the right direction. Sometimes she'd make another comment about money or ambition, and I'd just shrug. She smiled when I didn't push back, clearly thinking the problem had solved itself. Late at night, while she slept, I'd lie awake listening to the city outside, cars passing, distant sirens, the hum of life continuing without us. Instead of panic, I felt an unfamiliar calm. The fear that used to grip my chest was gone, replaced by something steadier. Clarity. I stopped imagining our future together and started imagining my own. What it would feel like to wake up without walking on eggshells. To not measure my worth against someone else's expectations. To breathe. She didn't notice the shift. She kept planning, talking about upgrades, about lifestyles she assumed were inevitable. She had no idea that the safety net she'd relied on for years was quietly being folded away. And the strangest part was this: the more I prepared to leave, the lighter I felt. Like I was already halfway free. I just hadn't told her yet, and when I did, nothing would be negotiable anymore. I didn't plan some dramatic confrontation. I didn't rehearse speeches or wait for the perfect moment. One evening, after dinner, while the apartment was quiet and the TV hummed in the background, I told her we needed to talk. She looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something important, and said, "Can this be quick? I'm exhausted." I told her I was done. Not angry. Not shaking. Just done. She laughed at first, a short, disbelieving sound, and said, "You're being dramatic." When I didn't respond, her smile faded. I told her I was filing for divorce and that I'd already spoken to a lawyer. That's when the panic finally showed up on her face. She started asking questions all at once. "Since when? Why didn't you say anything? Are you serious right now?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list every sacrifice or replay every insult. I just said, "I don't feel respected here, and I'm not staying where I'm looked down on." She tried to interrupt me, but I kept going, calmly explaining that my decision wasn't up for debate. The more grounded I sounded, the more unsettled she became. Then came the switch. She softened her tone, sat closer, said things like, "I didn't mean it like that, and you're taking things too personally." When that didn't work, she jumped straight to fear. She asked how she'd manage expenses alone. She reminded me how much she still needed to get established. Hearing that word again, needed, made everything painfully clear. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing her panic. I felt detached, like I was watching someone realize consequences existed. She accused me of abandoning her, of being selfish after everything she'd been through. I listened, nodded once, and stood up. I told her I'd be staying elsewhere and that the rest would go through lawyers. As I packed a bag, my hands steady, I realized something surprising: I wasn't sad in the way I expected. I felt clear. Lighter. And when I walked out the door, I didn't look back, because for the first time in years, I wasn't leaving myself behind. The weeks after I left were quiet in a way that felt unreal. No passive-aggressive comments. No mocking jokes. No constant tension humming under the surface. Just silence, and space to finally think. I stayed with a friend at first, sleeping on a couch that squeaked every time I moved, but I slept better there than I had in years. She reached out sooner than I expected. At first, it was practical messages, questions about bills, deadlines, shared accounts. Then the tone shifted. She started calling instead of texting, her voice suddenly softer, careful. She told me she was stressed, that things were harder than she thought they'd be. I could hear it in the pauses, in the way she exhaled before speaking, like she was choosing her words now. One night, she said, "I didn't realize how much you handled." I almost laughed at that. Almost. She talked about rent increases, unexpected expenses, how her paycheck didn't stretch as far as she assumed it would. The same salary she once mocked now felt heavy in her hands. She mentioned cutting back, canceling subscriptions, skipping dinners out, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and detachment. Not because she was struggling, but because I'd warned her in ways she'd never taken seriously. Then she asked if we could talk about fixing things. She said she'd been under a lot of pressure, that she never meant to hurt me, that maybe she'd been unfair. There was no apology for the words that broke me, just discomfort with the consequences that followed them. I realized she didn't miss me, she missed the stability I provided. For the first time, I heard her without trying to rescue her. I told her calmly that I hoped she figured things out, but I wasn't coming back. The line went quiet for a long moment before she whispered my name, like it might change my mind. It didn't. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dim light of the room, feeling something settle inside me. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just certainty. She was finally facing the reality she thought she'd avoid forever, and I no longer felt responsible for cushioning the fall. One chapter was closing, but I could feel another one forming, steady and unfamiliar, just ahead. The months that followed felt strangely quiet, like my nervous system was finally learning what peace sounded like. I moved into a small place of my own, nothing fancy, but it was mine, no tension in the air, no need to brace myself before speaking. Mornings became slower. I drank my coffee without rushing, without replaying arguments in my head, without wondering how I'd be judged that day. I started noticing how much of myself I'd abandoned. How I'd stopped dreaming because survival had taken all my energy. Little by little, I reclaimed things I'd put on hold, interests, friendships, even career ideas I'd convinced myself were unrealistic. For the first time in years, my goals didn't revolve around proving my worth to someone else. Every so often, I'd hear updates about her through mutual connections. How she was struggling more than she expected. How the confidence she once wore so easily had dimmed under the weight of responsibility. I didn't feel satisfaction the way I thought I might. What I felt was distance, emotional and necessary. Her reality was no longer mine to manage. The biggest shift wasn't financial or logistical, it was internal. I stopped equating love with sacrifice. I stopped believing that being dependable meant being disposable. I finally understood that partnership without respect isn't partnership at all, it's slow erosion. One night, sitting alone in my quiet apartment, city lights flickering through the window, I realized something that made my chest tighten, not with pain, but with clarity. My income had never been the problem. My ambition had never been lacking. The only mistake I made was funding someone who saw me as temporary. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. But I will never again pour years of my life into someone who looks down on me while standing on what I built. That chapter taught me a lesson I won't forget: love should feel like alignment, not survival. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not behind anyone. I'm not catching up. I'm exactly where I need to be, moving forward on my own terms, with my dignity intact, and my future finally belonging to me.